Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that moves, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. Here we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's Run of the Week, and we're good to go for Green Bay as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 291. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with Ben Fennell about the Eagles' Week 13 battle at Lambeau Field against the Green Bay Packers. We'll talk about the matchup, things that will come into play for this game, and I also want to take a little bit of a step back, look at some of the schemes that they employ and what exactly make them work. We're hit on all of that right at the top of the show in Chalk Talk. After that, Ben and I will go through our scouting report segment, and this week, I wanted to focus on one of the best players on the Green Bay Packers, and that's pass rusher za'darius Smith. How is he going to impact this game on Sunday afternoon? How does he factor into the team's pressure package? How has his game changed since his days at Kentucky? We'll cover all of that in scouting report. The show does not end there, though, because at the end of the show today, I also caught up with Eagles linebacker Alex Singleton to talk about his athletic background and how he's gotten to where he is today in the middle of the Eagles defense. Before we get there, though, just a couple of things I want to make sure I remind you guys. Best way, number one, to support us, to go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. If you leave a question, I'll be sure to respond to it right here on the show. If you enjoy my conversations with Ben here every single week, then make sure you go and subscribe to the Journey to the Draft podcast. You can go find that wherever podcasts can be found. It's that time of year. The college season's coming closer to an end. The NFL season's getting a little bit closer to the end. You may be starting to wonder, who are some of the top prospects that are going to be available next spring? We have got you covered over on the Journey to the Draft podcast. You know, myself, Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell, Ross Tucker, twice a week, every week. And by the way, one of my favorite parts of Journey to the Draft podcast this year, we've worked in a new segment. It's called Scout Stories. Every single week, I talk with a current Eagles college scout and discuss a current player that's on the Eagles from back when they came out of college and entered the draft. We wrap it up with some big takeaways and good discussion about the position in general. This week, I caught up with Eagles Director of College Scouting, Anthony Patch, to talk about Eagles running back Corey Clement when he was coming out of Wisconsin. Here's a chunk from that interview. All right, joining us to talk about Eagles running back Corey Clement is Senior Director of College Scouting, Anthony Patch. And Patch, welcome back to the show, man. I wanted to talk about Eagles running back Corey Clement. And, you know, coming out, he was an undrafted free agent. And there was always like this allure, around the Wisconsin running backs and the production they've been able to have, but, they didn't produce at the NFL level all the time. I'm interested to kind of get your memories on scouting Corey and your experiences with him leading up to the NFL draft.
Yeah, Corey had a really, unfortunately for Corey at Wisconsin, he was hurt, up to his last year, basically. I mean, he had a procedure a couple of times, and so really his lone year was his last year, but he made the most of what he had that last year at Wisconsin. And, he kind of fell through the cracks going undrafted, because of the injury history probably, and just his testing numbers weren't great. But, he's a local kid. He was a highly touted kid, obviously, going to Wisconsin. And it's unfortunate he had the injury history going into at Wisconsin. Otherwise, he would have been drafted for sure. But, he ran I think 1,300 yards in his last year and only season starting at Wisconsin that year.
Yeah, he was a guy, too, like I mentioned, when you have those that history, going back to, Ron Dane at Wisconsin. And, so many guys that have been so productive in that school despite the change in coaching staffs, despite the change in systems. For our listeners, I feel like that gets talked about a lot is like, oh, well, stay away from the Wisconsin running back. Or, back when I remember when I was in high school, it was like, oh, the Florida receivers, don't touch the Florida receivers. They never work out. How do you kind of fight through that as a scout when you're, evaluating these guys on an individual basis, so year over year?
Yeah, he just, I don't know. And Corey had a great senior year, and I think he just got floated out because, the injuries and he didn't test well. But he, like I said, he ran for 1,300 yards that year, and we did the due process. He was a local kid, so people obviously knew him in the building and felt obviously really good after the draft. I mean, we had draftable grades across the board. So, after the draft, you're thinking, this guy's still on the board. Is it medical or is it, testing? And we were just happy as all get out to get him after the draft. approved. The one thing we didn't see or I didn't see when I went on the visit, on teams. And geez, Fran, I don't know, his impact in special teams for us early in the career here with Coach Phipp has been unbelievable. So that aspect he didn't see. And, he was there, Melvin Gordon was before him, James White, those guys have been good pros. So take every case by case, but, we felt good about Corey getting him where we did and what he's done for us.
Great conversation there with Anthony Patch. And if you think that's a segment that interests you, I implore you, go back, listen to those segments. We've had scouts on talking about Miles Sanders and Deshaun Jackson, Carson Wentz, Jason Peters, Jason Kelsey. The list goes on and on. It's been a really fun segment, and we've got a few more to roll out here over the next few weeks. We have it every other episode over on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. And again, you can find that wherever podcasts can be found. So talking about Journey to the Draft, let's talk about with the guy who is on every single episode of that show with me. That's Ben Fennell. Let's dive into our chat now in Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, excited to welcome back to the show my buddy Ben Fennell. Ben, real quick, we'll touch on what Eagles game plan is going to look like this week. Basic rundown. We talk about the Green Bay Packers offense and what they do in the pass game with obviously Aaron Rodgers, but namely Davante Adams. And Greg said it earlier this week here on this show, but also said it on Eagles game plan. He feels Davante Adams most well-rounded receiver in the NFL with everything that he brings. And we decided, you and I kind of decided to focus in on his usage and where they line him up all over the formation and how those tight splits can really be beneficial for both Aaron Rodgers and for Davante Adams. That was something you and I touched on last week here on the show with the Seattle offense and those tight splits. So you can go back, listen to last week's episode and see really why that can be so impactful against defenses. And then on the other side of the football, talking about that pass rush package with Za'Darius Smith, Preston Smith. You put Smith on the inside as a 3 technique and have him working against guards. But overall, just kind of big kind of takeaways, overarching takeaways from those two topics and going into this matchup overall.
Yeah, this is a fun matchup that seemingly we get almost like every year. Just ends up that way. There's a lot of carryover from players and coaching staffs and styles and draft tendencies, a lot of deep conversations between these two teams. But a lot of attention on Davante Adams, who's really solidified himself in the last 2 seasons as a perennial top 5 receiver, not only from his fellow receivers, but cornerbacks, giving their admiration and praise for him as well. And his whole arc and career trajectory is a really interesting study as well. There's so many interesting things with Davante Adams, from him being a relatively slow 4.55 type of receiver coming out of Fresno State, really struggled his first year or two to catch the ball and be consistent. And it really mirrored the way Nelson Aguilar, is early in his career. The Eagles struggling early on to just straight catch the football, really, lost some confidence, but each of them have really ascended later in their careers. But Davante Adams, his ability to win all over the field is as diverse as any receiver in the NFL. That's winning inside, outside, left side of the formation, right side of the formation, number 3 in trips, slot, and then against all levels of the defense. So the quick game, the intermediate, the deep stuff, the double moves, beating press coverage, off coverage, zone savviness. This guy every week, there's been a couple games where I've profiled it where I said he hit the equivalent of the receiver cycle. Because he literally beat every type of coverage at every level of the defense from every spot on the field. And then his releases, stems, breaks, double moves. I would implore anyone to go watch his film session where he sits down and talks with Brian Baldinger and really goes down through a lot of his process. He knows he's not a Blazer. And that's what makes his craftiness and the technician aspect of it so much more impressive. And to hear him talk about Keenan Allen and all these other guys around the league that he's taken certain aspects from, it's just a really fun study and player.
So I guess you follow this Packers team very, very closely. You write about them for The Athletic. When you look at that arc, that career arc for Davante Adams, I think that's kind of an important thing, an important takeaway for the listeners is, year 1, even year 2, right? I mean, there was not thought that Davante Adams was going to work out, and now he has turned into one of the best, if not the best receiver in football. It used to be, Ben, I remember years ago when I first started writing about the NFL, I did a lot of fantasy football writing, back for like Yahoo Sports and Pro Football Weekly. This is back like mid-2000s, 2004, 2005, 2006. I remember specifically writing articles about like year 3 for wide receivers is the breakout year. That's, those are the kind of guys you target in fantasy football, right? And I feel like that has kind of gone away as we've seen some receivers come in and have some success. And certainly there are those guys, but receiver's a tough position to go from college to the NFL. So it's kind of interesting. I guess that kind of being the takeaway there, you can't give up on a guy too early, especially at the receiver position.
Yeah, no question. And I feel like the guys that flashed immediately are the ones that we now set these broad expectations for, that we want results immediately. But they're more of the outliers, in my opinion.
Yep.
I think it takes a maturation process, and a lot of it's how you're used and the positions you're put in and what you're asked to do. And obviously the things, 2 years ago that Deebo Samuel was being asked to do was different than some of the outside receivers. And some things are more translatable from the college game to the pros. And I'm thinking, Fran, when you're talking about that mid-2000s era and into 2020, I feel like the receiver position has become one of the more translatable positions from Saturday to Sunday. I can get production and results out of that player faster than maybe another position. I think that's a lot to do with the schemes we're seeing on Saturdays now bleeding into Sundays. Very similar types of offenses, and the roles of the receivers are obviously then mirrored on Sundays. So that's a deeper conversation, I think, but really fun just to study the trajectory and the expectations of these players that you draft.
And I think a part of that, it comes down to, and it's something we talk about all the time over on the Journey of the Draft podcast, is that, you find what a player does well. How do we put him in those positions? The Eagles just played DK Metcalf last year as a rookie. A lot of DK Metcalf's routes were the same things that you saw him do at Ole Miss. We talked about the limited route tree with him, but he lined up on the left side of the formation very often for Seattle, and that's what he did at Ole Miss. And he ran a lot of slants, screens, go balls. Slants, screens, go balls. Like, hey, we're going to ask him to do the same things, and then we'll gradually work them in. And that's what they've done. And see, now you see a little bit more expansive route tree. You see him line up in the slot. You see him line up on the right side. And it's a similar kind of thing. You mentioned Deebo Samuel. Like, San Francisco 49ers are not having Deebo Samuel run isolation routes outside the numbers to try and create his own separation. They're finding ways to get him the football on the run and really accentuate his strengths. We talked about it with his Cooper Kupp, Cooper Kupp with the Rams. Like we talked about it right here on the show back in week 2. Like, not good against press coverage coming out of college. All right, we're going to line him up in stacks and bunches, and we're going to get him free, and we're going to let him kind of get up to the second level and then use him as a route runner, and then we'll ask him to create a separation. We're
just stuck in this world of comparative analysis, though. So if DK has a big rookie season, it's comparing him to the other rookies, and if you don't live up to that, you're a bust after year 1. Yep. So whether it's Jalen Reagor, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Rashawn Gary, whoever it is, you don't have to write their story after year 1. Some of these guys take time to develop and mature, and whether it's their body, their brains, whatever it is. Some just had a baby, and life is happening fast. Right. We're so quick to just anoint somebody or bury somebody immediately. We have to have a stance, and it has to be a polar. It has to be either all the way over here or all the way over here. I love looking at Davonte Adams and say, you know what? Slow down, everybody. All right. You don't have to label them after year 1. It's a development. It's a maturation process. Have some patience.
So let's go. We're going to take this a little bit differently than what we've normally done. We're not going to do, individual matchups and things left on the cutting room floor from game plan. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at this matchup. We're going to look at this Green Bay Packers team and ultimately how the Eagles will look to defend them on both sides of the football and how to attack them. But I want to pick a couple of different elements that I think will be impactful in this game and just kind of dive into the whys. Why do teams do it this way? What is the goal here? And ultimately, how does the opponent try to limit that? And the first thing, I think, you and I, we talk, obviously we watch a lot of football together. We watched a ton of film together over the years. One thing gets your motor running faster than anything else is running backs running routes out of the backfield vertically downfield. So, wheel routes, sail routes, rail routes, anything where a running back is releasing from the backfield and getting to the second and third level gives you a lot of juice. And the Green Bay Packers, maybe more so than anybody in football right now, are using running Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams, getting those guys out of the backfield and down the field. I want you to talk about why you feel running back verticals are such an effective tool for an offense and why they're so tough to deal with.
Releasing these running backs vertically is near and dear in my heart. It's something we've seen across the league over the past couple of years really catch fire. And first and foremost, it's using that personnel. The running back position is traditionally one of the more explosive players on the field. Don't limit him to just underneath routes in the run game. Let's get him down the field into open spaces using that vertical speed and explosive element. The other aspects of releasing from the backfield are a couple schematic things. Really tough to jam these players. You would have to designate a defensive end or a pass rusher to leave his assignment to bump that releasing back and then go rush the passer and the back runs his route. We've seen that around the league, but it's very tough to do because you're subtracting a pass rusher away from obviously trying to attack the quarterback. The other thing is you're attacking defenders from depth. So if the running back is 7 yards behind the quarterback and the linebacker is 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, you're approaching that defender with space and from depth. That allows you to build up speed while attacking him. And just imagine a receiver with a press corner nose to nose. You don't have that with a running back. So you have more space to operate, to get to a faster speed, to attack them. And typically that safety or linebacker in coverage is catching that player. And what I mean by catching is your feet are still, your feet are stopped, and you're kind of allowing them to come to you and you're going to react. You're so quick to break left, break right, break downhill, not usually ready to turn and run against these players that already have a head of steam. So there's a lot of schematic aspects of just the human natures of one player still, another player running full speed at him, putting him in a serious conflict of movement patterns. So I love just those kind of aspects. There's some other schematic aspects because that route is delayed coming out of the backfield. You're typically the second or third route through coverage. Yep. So the coverage is already defined by that point. So typically those wheels and those seams and those sails are going to be the second or third route through the zone that end up coming wide open. A lot of different layers and aspects to it, but it's something that's been around the league for 3, 4, 5 years now, and it's getting more and more creative.
I was glad you brought up that last point because I feel like that part is almost like not talked about enough. From a media standpoint, is that it's not only you get the matchups and it's man-to-man against a linebacker or safety or whoever it is, a peel player,
Yeah, it's a whole nother aspect. It's just the running back against you have a better matchup there.
Yeah, no question. But then you factor in, like, you go back to the Boston Scott touchdown that won the game for the Eagles against the Giants. Like, the Giants had a bracket coverage going. If they had known on a whiteboard, hey, they're going to get a vertical route coming out of the backfield, that's probably accounted for with the bracket. But since that, all those other routes have already expressed themselves, and the running back is last into the second level.
Just like Corey Clement in the Super Bowl. They doubled Ertz. Yep. If they had seen Corey Clement release when Ertz released, they would have accounted for him.
Yeah. So it's tough to account for that when you're looking at that from a pure coverage standpoint. So flipping this around now for the Eagles defense, what does this mean for them? How do you account for that? To me, look, going into this matchup, you know that this is a effective tool in the toolbox for Matt LaFleur and for Aaron Rodgers. So the safeties, the nickel corners, the linebackers, they're going to have an idea. Hey, like this is something that could be coming our way, but you've got to be aware of where those backs are at all times. When you're in zone coverage, when they're in man, it's going to ultimately come down to, like, you got to be able to hang in the hip pocket of the running back when he's working.
Yeah, and there's some technique aspects. When you're in man coverage, you got to play on your toes. You got to keep your feet moving, ready to break, and be aware that this route, whether it's an option route or a choice route or even a design route, can go vertically. You have to have that aspect of thinking, I have to turn and run here. If it's zone coverage, just honoring and, playing discipline in your zone coverages and knowing that second or third route through the zone is typically going to attack that vulnerability. Yep. But there's some negatives as well. So everything has a pro and a con to it. Some of the negatives of releasing that backfield, you're at negative depth. So that means it takes time to get into the defense. And then if you want to get into the second or third level, Fran, that's even more time.
Yep.
So where's the negative there? You better protect the quarterback if you want to hit these plays of the running backs down the field vertically. They're not on the line of scrimmage like a receiver, and then one step, you're into the defense. No, you have to run 5, 6, maybe 7 yards before you even clear the line of scrimmage. So it's a long developing process. The protection has to hold up. So there are some negative aspects in using that as well.
And not to mention the idea that the running back is running very close, very tight to the formation. You and I were just watching some Clemson offense earlier this morning. They're leaking Travis Etienne up to the second and third level on a little pop pass. He gets held up because of all that traffic inside, time is thrown off and Trevor Lawrence gets a hit. So, there's certainly a chance for things to go awry there.
And that's rarely a check release either. If you're releasing vertically, you're not part of the pass protection.
No, you're going. Yep.
Yes, no question. So if by chance you get blitz call there could be a conflict of style, or somebody put in a bind there where the quarterback maybe has a free rusher because you don't have that extra man in protection.
All right, let's get to an extra aspect here of this Green Bay Packers offense that the Eagles will have to deal with, and that is the use of jet sweep action, pre-snap motion, namely from that jet aspect of it, though. And we've talked a little bit about it here, but let's talk about what the goal is for the offense. And namely, you study this Green Bay Packers offense so much. How did they use it as a tool, and what part of the game does it really impact most for them?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see this change in style coming from Mike McCarthy era. Last year was a Habsy Matt LaFleur, and now it's full systems go of Matt LaFleur. You're seeing all the pre-snap motion. You're seeing a lot more bunches, a lot more RPOs, all that new age stuff to help the offense generate yards and, put conflicts on defenders and attack space. He's really done a great job in finding all those schematic elements to help move the ball down the field. First and foremost, the pre-snap motion, particularly jet motion. And at the end of the day, it helps the run game about 80-90% of the time as opposed to the pass game. And from a human nature standpoint, this game is complicated. I like to break it down to just a simple human nature. When you have moving parts pre-snap, it forces defenders to think. And when you have to think, you hesitate. So there's a connection of mental processing into your physical processing. The second you then hesitate, you're a step behind, or maybe you have an eye violation because of that moving part. You're then a step behind. What does that delay then do? It allows blockers to maybe get an extra step to leverage their assignment. It could maybe create hesitation and literally create a seal in the defense or a lane in the defense to attack via the run game. So just the human nature aspect of a moving part, we have to then think and assess and diagnose before we can move. So first and foremost, it just causes you to think out there. And sometimes, Fran, that's all it takes to be a half step ahead from an offense to a defensive perspective. And that's a big gain for you.
Yeah, and it really ultimately it comes down to everybody kind of doing their job. It's funny because we see so much of it now around the NFL, and so for that reason, we see a lot of those clips kind of circulating on Twitter, and what leads to this play's success. And you'll see everybody blamed on jet sweeps. You'll see defense. Oh, the unblocked defensive end, he's got to make that play. Oh, the linebacker play side, he's got to make that play. The safety from depth, he's got to make that play. Why isn't the corner making that play? Look, it depends on the construct of the play. Each of those are there's little wrinkles here and there depending on the offense and the execution of the play. But ultimately, all of these guys have got to be on their P's and Q's in order to fit the run. I know it's an exotic kind of run. It's not a normal just hand it off to the back and it's going to be a gap scheme between the tackles. It's not that kind of run, but it requires everybody to be gap sound with their assignments and making sure that they're not reacting to something else. You've got to just do your job within the run fit.
Yeah, and without going too deep, always like to be fair and paint the full picture. Some of the negatives of jet motion, first and foremost, you don't typically see it when teams are behind or in hurry up. Why? Because it takes time. So you have to key that guy to go across the formation first, just a couple extra seconds pre-snap there.
So if you're a team that plays a lot of tempo, you're going to use a little bit less pre-snap motion.
No question, because then you're allowing the defense to catch a breath and have a couple extra seconds pre-snap.
Yep.
A couple other aspects of that pre-snap motion. Some quarterbacks, traditional 90s, early 2000s, didn't like motion because what motion does on the offense, movement on the offense will sometimes change the picture on the defense. Quarterbacks like Peyton Manning didn't want the defensive picture to change, because it was tougher to assess what they were doing if they had moving parts. We have moving parts, you have moving parts. What happens from pre-snap to post-snap? And the same thing goes for offensive linemen, which I've heard more of today, in saying, I put my hand in the turf, I blinked, and the picture changed because we had motion. So all of a sudden, my blocking assignments and angles and tracks change based on man schemes, gap schemes, zones, whatever they're running there. But long story short, the picture changes. So the assignments change, your eyes change, things like that. Other aspects, you have a jet motion receiver. Typically, he's not using a route combination.
Yep.
He's
You're
kind of already
removing a
taken
player
away.
from the route. Yep.
We're starting to see some creativity, some jet into a takeoff up the field, things like that. It's really starting to evolve. But there are some negative aspects too. And I always like to paint the fair picture because everyone's going to say, well, if it's so great, why isn't everybody using it? Well, different strokes for different folks. So pros and cons to everything.
And Aaron Rodgers historically was one of those guys that kind of fought it initially, right? He did not want that pre-snap motion for the reasons that you kind of illustrated. You talked about one aspect of it that we're starting to see a little bit more. The Eagles have used it a little bit. I think back to the long play by John Hightower. They brought him in jet motion from right to left and then sent him on a takeoff route immediately. The reason why that's so effective for an offense is that basically, if you're a zone team from a coverage standpoint, if you play a lot of pattern match zone, you're going to have different rules based on the coverage call. So, and a lot of that will change depending on what the offensive formation is. Your rules are going to be different in pattern match cover 3 if you're seeing a 3-by-1 set versus a 2-by-2 set. Well, if you use those jet motions and that receiver is going to release vertically, what was a 2-by-2 just like that changes to a 3-by-1, and you have to know all of your checks on the fly as you're moving and dealing with however those routes deploy themselves. And so that also can become a little bit of an issue at times.
Amazing to talk for 5-10 minutes and not say horizontal stretching either.
No question.
Stretching the defense horizontally, making them guard every bit of grass left to right. We're so used to talking about vertical spacing, taking the top off the defense, stretching the defense. You could stretch them laterally as well, and that typically will then stress zones and open up other players because of that stress and spacing they have to cover.
All right, so a lot to unpack there. And one of the things we talked about was the Aaron Rodgers, wasn't really embracing the pre-snap motion stuff early on. Well, he's executing it at such a high level. This is some of the best Aaron Rodgers I've ever seen. He's one that's certainly going to be on the short list for the MVP vote when the season is done. Tell us, as someone who has watched every Aaron Rodgers snap since from the start of his career till now, how has he evolved, especially over the last few years? Because you and I have watched a lot of his film together over the years, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. And there was a lot of head scratching. There was a lot of what was he thinking on this one? Why did he take this sack? Why didn't he throw this ball? Why did he throw this pick? Why is he running here? This receiver's wide open. This is exactly what the play was designed to do. That's not really the case as much this year. So take us through how you kind of view that and his evolution under this system here with Matt LaFleur.
All right, really quick, just going through it, in a linear fashion. We all know Aaron Rodgers blessed us all with amazing plays out of structure improvisationally for 8 to better part of a decade, 8 years to a decade. Won a Super Bowl, an MVP. We've seen it. Great results. Suddenly, as you're getting older and you had the knee injury a couple years ago and the collarbone and maybe not as fleet of foot, when you get older in your career, in your mid-30s, late 30s, 40s, you don't hold the ball longer. That's not how it works. Any quarterback that has success into the twilight of his career, whether it's Kurt Warner, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, they're pocket passing assassins that win with their mind and their experience. There's nothing they haven't seen. They know there's vulnerabilities in defense, and they're going to find it. Yep. They know where it is. But Aaron still relied on his improvisational, out-of-structure process, which no longer started to produce the same results. So then we started to look at the process of it and say, why didn't he make that first read? Why is he trying to escape a clean pocket? Why didn't he make this throw? And we look at his stats at the end of the season and say, oh, he barely threw any interceptions, because we aren't grading the throws and the decisions he doesn't make.
Yep.
So for a number of years, he was a little greedy. He wanted plays to break down. He held on to the ball, but suddenly we weren't getting the results anymore. So we had to study the process, and we started to say, what is he doing? He needs to be a pocket passing quarterback distributor first. You don't rely on improvisation as a primary skill set. And I've said that over the years. That's a secondary skill set to solve a problem. And I've always said, kind of tongue in cheek, Aaron Rodgers' highlights are from the pocket. And that's me saying, stop running around. Use your arm. Play from the pocket. And that's what we've seen last year into this year in the change of Aaron Rodgers. The more willingness to play within structure, within rhythm and timing of the offense. He's on pace right now for his career best time to throw, which is a great metric from PFF. He's on pace for the fewest scrambles of his career. I mean, last week, Fran, he had 4 touchdowns. It looked like an awesome game. they're for just over 200 yards on 21 completions. They ran 39 times for almost 200 yards.
Yep.
This was elite game manager Aaron Rodgers, and that is not a negative. You know who wants a game manager? Everybody. And he's doing it at a very, very high rate. He's got 7 games this year with no turnover-worthy plays. He's taken the fewest quarterback hits. They're running the ball. He's executing on third down, play action. When you run the ball well, he gets the ball out of his hands. Typically, not a whole lot of sacks, not a whole lot of hits, not holding the ball anymore. And it's just refreshing to see because he can play till he's 44, 45 years old because he still has one of the most gifted right arms on the planet, even at this age. He's still accurate, and he's still a very, very good quarterback. You just need to change his style. And I think it's one of those conversations that really kind of went underneath the nose of national media and figuring out, is it Aaron Rodgers or is it all this problem around him and no first-round receivers and where's the talent and the scheme, and seemed to be everybody but him. But he was part of the problem, and now he's fixed it. And I think it's a great, great story for 2020.
And I think it's a takeaway. Like, to me, like, all the analysis of Carson Wentz, and Carson Wentz obviously is not playing well, right? We know this. I'm not like breaking news there. I think ultimately when you talk about Carson Wentz and you say, like, okay, is he a quarterback who is not playing well, or was everything we saw 3 years ago a mirage? I would absolutely argue option A. I think he's a good quarterback that is not playing well right now. And I think when you look at Aaron Rodgers, the way that he played up until this year was not playing the quarterback position at an extremely high level. And even, like, I remember there were games where he would throw for like 3 touchdowns and 330 yards, and PFF, and you could argue PFF grades. I'm not going to sit here and pound the table for PFF grades, but they would grade him as like one of the worst quarterbacks of the week, and everybody like, well, these guys don't know what they're doing. But it was because of that. It was because he was not playing the position at a level where you would say, like, oh man, like, he is, he's executing everything the way you want it to be drawn up. That had not been the case. He just happened to overcome that at times, and sometimes that resulted in high volume games of great production. Other times it didn't. It's not like if you play fantasy football, Aaron Rodgers was not a first round pick for the last handful of years because he was not playing to that level. So
and those grades also fed into the conversation, saying, well, why is he graded so high then?
Right. And I think that it's really interesting when you kind of take that and say, okay, well, what can Carson Wentz do moving forward? There are things that he's going to need to correct, but don't say like, hey, like, there's no way that Carson Wentz can reach that level of play. Once again, he can get this turned around. And I think ultimately the Aaron Rodgers narrative, the arc there, I think is an interesting one to follow.
Really quick example that I've used for years just to give people a picture of what I'm talking about with Aaron Rodgers. Fran, it's 3rd and 5, man-to-man, slant flat. Let's just say the guy guarding the slant falls down.
Yep.
It's wide open. The quarterback doesn't throw it, breaks the pocket, runs for 6 yards, and gets the first down. Does he get a positive grade or a negative grade?
Right. So,
I put this on Twitter a couple years ago. I'll let you have the floor here for a second.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of people would say that would be a negative grade. There are some that would say positive grade, but there are a lot of people that would say that's a negative grade.
Well, it's actually the opposite. The number of people that say it's a positive because the result was
first down.
positive.
Yes, of course.
He got 6 yards. But like I said before, you do not rely on improvisation as a primary skill set to execute a play. And if the primary objective was there and available and you didn't take it, you did not do your job as a quarterback. That's a negative grade every day of the week, in my opinion. And that's a great snapshot of the process versus results with Aaron Rodgers. The results were positive, but once those results stopped generating, we had to look at the process and what was going wrong. And I think it's really kind of night and day in 2020.
And to clarify, I have the comparison Aaron Rodgers to Carson Wentz, what Carson Wentz is going through. It is not a perfect apples to apples comparison. This is, Carson there's other factors at play, and in terms of the things that he has to correct versus what Rodgers corrected, but same kind of idea. And that so you saw a lot of bad play from Rodgers. You'd say the same thing about Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, certainly as well. There are issues with young quarterbacks go through it. This is part of the development.
And the
process.
blessing of it all, Fran, is with just like when Aaron Rodgers was struggling, we never once said he doesn't have the ability.
Yep. Right.
And same to Carson Wentz. He still has the ability, folks.
Yeah, no question.
He's just, maybe it's, the confidence, the scheme, whatever it is. But it's just a confidence that everybody should have in Eagles world to say, you know what, you can still fix this because he has the ability.
All right, well, let's quickly wrap this up with one of the highlights offensively for the Eagles this past week. I thought was a concept we've seen them run, and the reason why I brought this up was that watching the Packers, I've seen this concept run from the Packers a couple of times this year, and it was this the play I'm talking about is the Dallas Goedert touchdown late in the first half, was late in the second quarter. Carson Wentz hits him in the middle of the end zone on what we call a stick nod return concept. So I just wanted to kind of paint the picture of what the play is. And if you can kind of take us through why you like it so much. Because to me, like, this is a play that when I think of Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, this goes back to when Mike McCarthy was there. They ran a bunch of simple, basic West Coast offense staple concepts. You mentioned slant flat. They'd run stick, they'd run double slant. I mean, ran all those basic quick game concepts, those two-man route concepts. And then they ran all of the double moves, all the complementary plays off of that. And I feel like stick nod return is a great example of that. It was effective for the Eagles on Monday night rather. And the Packers have used it throughout the course of this season as well. Take us through stick nod return and what it looks like.
We have to start getting a whiteboard on these podcasts here, Fran. But they're essentially two double moves. A stick nod is a more traditional double move, and playing off of the stick route, which is literally 5-7 yards, and turn around. But here you fake the turnaround and you re-break up the field. So the stick and the nod means go, nod means release. It's not stick, nod, go, because that would be stick, go, go.
Stick, go, yeah.
The nod means go. So a stick nod, you're faking the stick and going up the field. The return route is essentially breaking to the outside, running a couple steps, and then re-breaking back inside. So if you could kind of visualize the stick nod on the inside and the return route just on the outside of it, they're both going to kind of put their foot in the ground at the same spot, break subtly to the right. Their tight end will break up the field with the stick nod. The return is going to come back underneath that route if you have the right visual there. But the return route is a very vanilla style double move. It's typically just an underneath kind of progression route, but at the end of the day, it is a double breaking route by definition.
It's a great breakdown of the play, and it's really effective when
I like these exercises. It gets me sharper on explaining the scheme, especially with no whiteboard or anything.
Yeah, there's no visual, so you got to do it all through audio. I think the best part about the play is when you've got something on the opposite side of the field that can remove those defenders from the middle. So, in this game, the Eagles, they had that little now screen, that little picket fence screen set up to Greg Ward. Carson Wentz turns to his left, pumps over there. That moves two defenders from the middle of the field, from the post. That creates some space there for Dallas Goedert. Now, essentially, one-on-one with a safety in the post, and he's able to win for a touchdown.
And there's a couple ways to win that, too. If it's man-to-man, we love double moves just based on the double move essence. Yep. If it's zone coverage, we're essentially high-lowing that linebacker. If he runs up with the tight end on the stick nod, the return route's going to be open underneath. And vice versa. If he bites underneath, the stick nod should be open. So bit of a zone beater of a high-low, and we always like double moves against man coverage if protection can hold up.
And if everything's there, or if everything's taken away, you throw it into the third row. You throw
no
it,
question.
Throw it out
Live to play another down.
Exactly right. Well, Ben, this was fun, man. A little bit of a different spin from what we normally do here on the show. Before we let you go, though, I'm not going to let you roll without some stats here. Give us a stat or two that you're kind of looking at as being pivotal to this game.
Yeah, we talked about just this full deployment of Matt LaFleur's offense, Green Bay's offense, top five, and bunches, stacks, motions, RPOs. We're going to see all that kind of easy offense generated. Eagles got to tackle well. They're going to make completions, try to get yards after catch. Eagles just have to rally and tackle. Bit of an interesting conflict here. I don't think people are realizing how dominant this Eagles defensive line is. They have the second most sacks, the third best sack rate, the fourth best pressure rate. And that's going to meet Green Bay's offensive line. That's taken the fewest quarterback hits this year, the best hit rate. I think Aaron Rodgers has only been hit 16 times in 11 games, which is remarkable considering Carson leads the league at, I think, 64 times, nearly 4 times as many. So interesting style, a really good protection against a pretty daunting Eagles defensive front there. I think it's going to be a really interesting style. The other thing with Green Bay's offense, lost all the shootouts last year. Anytime a team scored 25 points, 0-4, including that big NFC Championship game. This year, when teams score 25 points, they're 3-3. Much more willing and able to win the high-scoring shootouts. You got to be able to win different style games.
a big one for me real quick. And this is a segment that's actually going to air on Eagles Game Plan this week. For our tape study segment, I kind of went back, watched that Eagles-Packers game from a year ago. And, a big part, you and I watched it together. The first down offense was so good. And the Eagles were just so efficient in that game back last September. I mean, it was no sacks, no turnovers. They put, I think, 34 points up on the board. They were just really, really efficient. But first down, I mean, they averaged over 5 yards of play on first down. On first down carries, they averaged 5.3 yards per carry, 20 runs for 105 yards. Just for context, the Eagles had 24 offensive plays this past week against Seattle, 2.1 yards per play. I mean, less than half of that. So when you talk about having the ability to win on third down, we always hear, you got to have success on first and second down. That for those first down numbers, huge in terms of overall efficiency offensively. The Eagles have to find a way to have that level of success on first down on Sunday afternoon. So, all right, before we let you go, we're going to do as we always do. We're going to take a look at one player on the opposing team, just kind of talk big picture a little bit. It's time for Scouting Report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, Ben. So this week here on Scouting Report, I want to focus in on pass rusher za'darius Smith from the Green Bay Packers, and just kind of talk about how we viewed him coming out of Kentucky. This is 6 years ago now. When he was coming out of Kentucky in 2015. Overall thoughts on how you viewed him and ultimately his career arc here so far in the NFL.
All right, I'm going to take this backwards because this was the best pass rusher in the NFL last year, bar none. That's whoever you want to put in that conversation, the Bosas and the Aaron Donalds and Myles Garrett. za'darius Smith was the best pass rusher in the NFL. Won from a variety of linemen up and down the defensive line, stand up, hand in the turf, variety of pass rush plans, hand moves, stunts, twists, games. He really, last year, was everything we wanted Jadeveon Clowney to be, being the number 1 overall pick. Just that relentless, you can line him up anywhere, beat anybody. Really, really impressive player, particularly last year. But taking it back to his days at Kentucky, he was a big defensive end at 6'4", 275. But coming out of high school, he played basketball mostly in high school. He wanted to be a basketball player in college, joined the football team just a couple days before his senior season. So a little bit raw in his football maturation and getting onto the field. Ended up just going JUCO to our favorite East Mississippi Community College, the old Last Chance U. 2 seasons down there, became a highly coveted JUCO player. Was actually going to go to Florida State. A lot of people don't realize this. Florida State defensive coordinator Mark Stoops takes the head coaching job at Kentucky. Brings old za'darius Smith with him. So that's kind of how za'darius Smith, highly coveted JUCO kid, ended up at Kentucky. He was getting offers from Florida State and Auburn, some who's who around the country. Everybody remembers Bud Dupree, first-round pick. Well, za'darius was the opposite of him. Very quick off the ball, really good length, wingspan. You still saw the hand moves, the swims, the swats, the core strength. He'll fight with his upper body. He'll play through the whistle, really relentless. He'll even slide at 3-tech in college every now and then.
Yep.
The issue with him, Fran, in college, he was stiff. He wasn't winning the high side rushes. He wasn't beating tackles with speed. Very raw as well as far as play ID and things like that. He could really kind of wash himself out of plays with any sort of misdirection, just for not being on the field a whole lot. Just didn't have a great flow and feel for certain schemes, particularly run schemes. But really active player, and you could see the flashes of the core strength, the upper body, the hand usage, the length, the wingspan, and just being relentless. And I think that's all kind of bled into his times early with the Baltimore Ravens and these 2 1.5 seasons with the Packers so far.
Yeah, I think, going back to my notes on him, you mentioned, he was kind of a late bloomer, didn't play football to his senior year. When you watch him, I saw him twice live. I saw him at the East-West Shrine Bowl, and he had a pretty good week down there. And then he was a late ad the week of at the Senior Bowl. So got to see him go down there, and he performed well late in the week as well. And that he actually was a player that, walking away from St. Petersburg, I was like, this kid looked pretty good, and honestly better than what I saw on film. Because on film, you mentioned the stiffness. You didn't see much of a pass rush playing, but as you mentioned, he was a raw player. He had not played a ton of games or a ton of balls. So ultimately, looking at his game, it was based off the natural strength and power that was there and his high motor. And you said, all right, that's something we can work with. He had some relatives that had played in the league. He had a brother who played with the Broncos. He had a cousin who played with the Giants. So there were some bloodlines there, guys that had been through the process a little bit. But this was a really interesting player that you're like, all right, well, can he put it together? And you talked early at the very top about watching him a year ago and all the different ways he was able to win and just the well-developed pass rush plan and, the ability to win from multiple techniques. I mean, you did not see that at Kentucky. You see it now here, certainly with Baltimore, but then over the past year and change with the Green Bay Packers. So, looking at za'darius Smith and just trying to plot out his development, I think has been kind of a fun process because he has turned into one of the most fearsome edge players in the NFL. And they also line him up inside a good bit.
Yeah, and I think he ended up with an absolute blessing in disguise draft spot going in the 4th round to the Baltimore Ravens. Ends up with guys like Elvis Dumervil and Terrell Suggs and even guys like Chris Canty, who were in the back half of his career, veteran presences around him to just learn the crafts and just become a better pro. And I really think he absorbed a lot of that kind of mentoring from the older guys. I just think that was a great situation for him. Took free agent money to Green Bay. Huge first season. A little slow starting in 2020. Mike Pettin really relied on those one-on-one rushes to win again. Preston Smith, not quite the same player he was last year. Rashawn Gary is ascending. Little slow with the pass rush as far as the first half of 2020, but definitely looks like it's picking up.
So he is a guy that's not necessarily known for like elite first step, like get off the ball, fast twitch, like that's not like his bag. And that's what's kind of interesting to me. And I feel like my thought process on a lot of these guys has changed. You're going to get the freak show. I mean, Myles Garrett, we talked about a couple weeks ago, the way that he gets off the ball at his size is, kind of unheard of. But when you look at a large majority of these guys, I really feel like the power element, the ability to work through an offensive tackle, that's something that I feel is a little bit more important to me than maybe I would have thought 3-4 years ago. And I want to get the guy that's the souped up race car that's going to turn the corner and beat a guy and edge a guy quickly. I don't know that I value that quite as much as I do. Hey, who's the guy that can just work right through your pads? You see Brandon Graham work, week after week after week, year after year. He is not a pure like, hey, I'm going to blow by you and turn the corner. He is going to mix things up. There are times when he wins with a high side rush, but he's trying to work through you just as often.
Well, Fran, in the same boat, I can't remember who was talking about. I think it was offensive lineman at Masterminds this year that I didn't get to, but they were talking about Nick Bosa or Joey Bosa. And they're like, listen, guys, this guy isn't the biggest guy, the strongest guy, the fastest guy. How does he win all the time? Hands, 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 hands. And when I wrote down all of za'darius Smith's moves from last year, cross chop, double hand swipe, stab chop, club rip, speed to power. Tell you what, this guy led the NFL in pressures last year. Rarely won with speed.
Yep.
The Bosa, some of the best pass rushers in the NFL, rarely win with speed. They can obviously win the high side. Typically, they're doing that with some sort of hand usage. But you just hear all these top moves from za'darius. None of it's speed-based. So like you're saying about power, going from A to B, playing through offensive linemen, sometimes I want those guys as opposed to the what I call runaround types.
Yep.
So we talk about that a lot and say, he's a runaround. He wants to just go around him. Sometimes I want those guys that are willing to go through you, and he could go outside, inside, through you and have that three-way go.
Yeah, even if you do like to be if you like to win with speed, like that's cool, but you have to show that ability to win with some kind of power, where you'll win low side at times. Because you think about who are some of the best pass rushers in the NFL right now. You go to Khalil Mack. He is going to win with power. You mentioned Joey Bosa. You mentioned, look at Danielle Hunter with what he can do with his long arm. J.J. Watt for years. Cam Jordan.
T.J. Watt.
T.J. Watt. You mentioned za'darius Smith. Frank Clark is going to run through you. B.G. Brandon Graham's going to go through you. Carlos Dunlap is going to go through you, right? But then you start getting, all right, well, who are the longer?
Who are the other ones? Yeah.
So you look at DeMarcus Lawrence. He wins with speed. But what has he developed over the last 3 or 4 years that has made
wicked cross chop?
That and two, he goes with that long arm and then goes long arm slap rip, right? So he's setting that outside move with that devastating long arm that he's got. So you've got to be able to establish yourself as a power rusher and show that you can work through. And I feel like that's what opens everything else up. You can't just be a pure runner.
Well, are the speed rushers becoming the unicorns, the Von Millers of the world, the Robert Quinns? Is it the Harold Landrys of the world and saying, you know what, the runaround speed rushers, high side rushers, is that doing more harm than good? Are they running themselves out of plays too often? Or would you rather have a Bradley Chubb who, yeah, I'm a good run defender. I could play on early downs and suddenly I'm leading the NFL or NFL rookies in sacks because I'm on the field all the time.
Who are the pure speed guys now? I mean, would you say like it's Von Miller, Yannick Ngakoue, Justin Houston? Like who else would you say is that kind of guy in today's NFL? I mean, like Bud Dupree coming out of Kentucky was that guy, but he's developed into a good power rusher as well. Like I guess Robert Quinn would be a good example. He's kind of bounced around. He's on his third team in 3 years. Nice player, but again, it's kind of bounced around. That was the question with Brian Burns coming out of Carolina. He's done some really good, or coming out of Florida State rather, and he's done some good things so far.
I mean, look at all the top pressures from last year, from Brandon Graham, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Chandler Jones, Aaron Donald, Nick Bosa, Shaquille Barrett. I mean, none of these guys are runaround types.
Yeah, Shaq Barrett, I think, is you look at it, he's all right. He's probably in that, and he worked with Von Miller for years in Denver. So in terms of like skill set wise, that would be. But again, that's the outlier, it seems, right?
That's why I look at guys like Josh Allen out of Kentucky. It's just weird we're going with another Kentucky pass rusher and say, these runaround types, man, I just worry about them. Yeah. I worry about his ability to play point of attack against the run. I worry about his ability to be on the field in early downs.
Yep.
And typically those edge rushers are a little light in the pants, whether it's Chris Rumpf out of Duke or Quincy Roche out of Miami this year, whoever it is. There's a bunch every year that they say flexible edge rusher. Is he going to be able to play the run? Can I play him on early downs? Typically, those speed rushers have those issues.
No question. We talk a lot about all of those guys over on the Journey of the Draft podcast, which you guys can find wherever podcasts can be found. Ben, this was fun, man. We will talk to you here next week on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Experience the fastest internet and more in a snap. With Xfinity XFi, you get the speed, coverage, control, and security you need for the ultimate in-home Wi-Fi experience. Xfinity, proud partner of the Philadelphia Eagles. Well, great stuff there from Ben, who you can follow on Twitter, just like I do, at @BenFennell_NFL. And while you're at it, I'm at EaglesXOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce here at Eagles Entertainment. And you know I greatly appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on all forms of social media. That's one way to support the show. But the other way is to go on to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating, leave us a comment. If you leave a question, we'll answer it here on the show. And today, I wanted to give a shout out to somebody who did exactly that. There's three questions actually that we're going to hit on here. Italian Baller left us a 5-star review saying, love the work you guys do. It's a must-listen podcast. A question. I think one cause the Eagles' offensive struggles this year is that the pass game needs to be more diversified. I see almost all 5- and 7-step drop-back pass progression reads, and for Wentz to find the open receiver based on coverage. I would like to see them do what some other teams do in terms of scheming receivers open with motion or play design and isolating our playmakers against weaker defenders. I'd like to see them feature Sanders and Rager the way that Kamara and Tyreek Hill are used by their respective teams. Don't you think that would simplify things for Wentz and help him get the ball out quicker? Thanks, Brett. Brett, that's a good question. And look, we talked about it earlier with Ben, right? Every offense has pros and cons. We talked earlier this week, when I was talking with Greg. I asked him what he sees from the film. What is the identity in his mind of this Eagles passing game? And it's a lot of isolation-based routes. And we talked about the pros and cons of that. We talked about, certainly there are cons to everything, but that's what they're hoping for is the pros. And he talked about some of the things that they're looking to do. Obviously, the NFL is certainly trending more towards some of the offenses that you're talking about, but there are lots of offenses that have had plenty of success going with the path that the Eagles have taken. Look, I think the Eagles are looking for any way possible to try and get this pass game, this run game, get them on track, get those playmakers in space, get them the football. We'll see if they can continue to try and tweak things up and see if they can find a more efficient way to move the football down the field. But certainly, I agree with what you're saying in terms of looking around at some of these other schemes and can they work some of this stuff in. I think that's something they'll look to continue to do over the final few weeks of the season. Last question here. D. Jansen 22 left us a 5-star review saying, love the show, look forward to it every week. My wish for this year is for the team to just punch another team in the mouth and impose their will. Seems like this team is not attacking any defense. I wish I could tell them, this is your ball, this is your end zone. Don't let anything stop you from catching that ball. I just wish I could see one game where they play with fire in all 3 phases. Brett, or Jansen rather, I think, yeah, that's something that we're all looking for, especially that last part is where where you're playing with all three phases. That being said, I don't think it's a play with fire aspect of it. I don't think that the effort isn't there or anything like that. I think it's more just the execution part of it. And when you're not executing, it's hard to kind of get out of that rut. It's hard to get back into feeling that you're confident with everything that you're doing, right? And this isn't just one player or one position. That's a whole unit. And we talked about that back in the Cleveland game, that opening drive. They moved the ball with ease, right? We saw a couple passes from Carson Wentz. We saw some runs from Miles Sanders, from Boston Scott. They're picking up chunk after chunk after chunk. And what happens? You get into the low red zone, and the ball comes on the ground. Cleveland jumps on it, and you get a turnover. And it's tough to say, why couldn't the offense just look like that the rest of the day? But those kinds of plays are deflating, and there's an unquantifiable factor that those kinds of plays have when turnovers have, not just on your offense, but on your defense as well. And it's it's tough to say, oh, here we go again. We talked about it with Ike Reese literally that night on the postgame show. Myself and Amy Campbell, we asked Ike about what the kind of impact that can have. Those kinds of things, it's tough for that not to creep into your mind. So ultimately, when it comes to execution and confidence and playing with what you call playing with fire in all three phases, everybody's looking for that, right? The players are hoping for that. The coaches are hoping for that. Everybody is hoping that you could have that game where everything clicks. We just have to continue to hope that they can figure out a way to have that happen. Look, the clock is ticking now, getting closer to the end of the season. The Eagles no longer in first place in the division. They've got this tie that's in their back pocket. That's going to kind of make or break, essentially breaking a tie with any teams that they have at the top of the NFC East. You've got a couple of key games here, obviously against some winning teams, but really the two games that are going to matter most ultimately in this season, those final 2 weeks against Dallas and against Washington to get some more division wins. Those are going to be pivotal. The Eagles have got to clean things up by the time they get certainly to that 2-game stretch to end the 2020 season. So, Brett, Jansen, both of you guys asked great questions. Thanks so much to both of you guys for your support. And if you guys have any questions at home, we will always answer them here on the podcast. All right, to wrap up this show, I caught up with Alex Singleton to talk about his athletic career and his background getting to the NFL. Let's get to that interview right now. Well, excited to welcome in for our one-on-one Eagles linebacker, Alex Singleton. Alex, welcome, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's talk about your background before we get into the gridiron and talk about football. Take us back to young Alex. What was your first love as a sports fan? Or what did you first start playing as a kid?
I played a lot of sports, but always football. Football's been the number one dream my whole life. I have a picture. I don't know how old I was. I know I went from Peter Pan as a 2-year-old. I dressed up every day as Peter Pan, and then at about 2.5, 3, my parents gave me a Cardinals uniform, and I wore a Cardinals uniform about every day until I had to go to school.
All right, back in those days, they were in the same division as the Eagles. We'll forgive that at that point. But who was your favorite player growing up?
I was a Brett Favre fan.
Gotcha. Okay, yep. That makes sense. You grew up Northern California, right? Thousand Oaks. Is that a northern part of the state?
No, Southern California.
Really?
Just outside of LA, actually. Yeah.
All right. So when you got to middle school, high school, did you play other sports outside of football?
Yeah, I wrestled at one point. I played baseball, and then really those three, and then in high school, it just after my sophomore year, it was just football.
And were you always a linebacker?
Always a linebacker. I tried to play quarterback for a little bit, and then that didn't work out. So then it was full-time linebacker.
All right. So take us through your recruiting process for college. How do you end up at Montana State?
It was pretty simple. One school came and only got one offer, so It was kind of best opportunity I got. I went up to Montana for the first time in February. All I had was a snowboard jacket that was probably about as thin as this. So I remember freezing on my recruiting trip, and then I committed that weekend because it was the only offer I had, so I was going.
So the initial plan I had read was that you were going to redshirt your first year, and then you kind of burned that redshirt just because of what you were doing on special teams. Was that something that was kind of the plan going in? Hey, you know what? I'm going to work my way to where they're not going to redshirt me?
That's how you always want to go in, to camp as a college, freshman. But yeah, and it's not like now when if you only play, 5 or 6 games, you get that red shirt year back. So, back then, for them to burn your red shirt, halfway through a season was kind of a big deal. And I just remember one week one of the coaches came up to me and he was like, hey, we need you to play. And that was kind of it. And yeah, I mean, I think you always work, to be the best player you can and help your team win. And, it's obviously worked out full circle now, to where I'm at. And so, I'm more than thankful to have done that for that team.
No question. And obviously, as you mentioned, it's all kind of worked out to where you've gotten to where you are in the middle of the Eagles defense right now. But take us through now, after college, that pre-draft process leading up. Did you go to all-star games? What was the pro day circuit like? Like, what was that pre-draft process like for you?
Yeah, so no all-star game, none of that. I went straight home. I graduated that winter, so I got to go home right away. And I trained for my pro day, which happened to be in about 3 or 4 inches of snow up in Montana. So, everything just really was real helpful in my recruiting process and then also draft process.
Yeah, the stars really aligned for you. So you go. It was Seattle, New England.
Yeah, and then back to Seattle a few times here and there, and then the last few weeks was in Minnesota, and then eventually they released me right before OTAs.
Was there a player early on during that time that you kind of connected with early and then kind of hey, I'll show you the ropes kid kind of situation?
What was awesome about Seattle at that time, and I mean still is, Bobby, KJ, and Bruce Irvin were there, and they were 3 guys that even to this day, I still lean on, for advice and just, have conversations just, as a man. So at that time to have those 3, one, show me, and then also, just be, those figures on the field, was pretty special to me.
And then what went into the decision to say, I'm going to go up to the CFL and make that career there?
Yeah, during that season, I got my Canadian citizenship, and I knew I could be in the draft up there. So when Minnesota released me, I had been, cut in that season 13 times, and I was just like, I want to play football. So I just decided to, take my, go up to Calgary and take my chance up there.
I'm assuming when you went up there, you brought a little bit more than the snowboarder's jacket this time.
Yeah, after being in Montana for 4 years, I definitely had an arsenal of winter clothes.
And then so now you come back to the NFL to be able to play. What was that opportunity like, and how did that come about? How did you end up here in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so, the 3 years in Canada, I put everything into that. It was kind of, when you sign a 3-year contract, you don't really know how whatever's going to happen, whether your plans ever come back in the NFL or not. 3 years is still a long time to, play any contact sport. And so, and luckily we won a championship my last season in Canada. And then so right after we'd won, I had about a week of enjoying that. And then it was to the, kind of workout circuits again, kind of that, free agent, just, come from the CFL. It's not like you're a high priority free agent. You're a guy that's just kind of, hey, I'm knocking on the door again. Hopefully someone lets me in. And, I had 5 workouts, one obviously with Philadelphia, and it ended up being that it felt like the best fit to me and, the best offer. And, so I grabbed it and just ran with it.
You made a good decision, thankfully for everybody. Let me ask you this question before we cut you loose. What is one part of playing linebacker that you feel that not a lot of people talk about, whether it's media, fan base, but it's really, really important to the position?
Man, that's a tough question. I think, being a leader, and I think people talk about it, but, taking control of the defense. It's a tough thing to do, especially, stepping in, in my situation halfway through the season, kind of being a guy that was just a special teamer.
Sure.
You gotta step in as a leader at any level playing linebacker, because you really are the only one that's communicating with the front and the back end all the time. You're the one that's relaying the calls. And I would say that's the biggest thing. I think the media and everybody talk about it, but also I think that that's still the biggest thing that even is unspoken.
And you growing up playing the position your entire life, there are so many people that will say, watch a college safety or, say, oh, you know what, we can move them over to linebacker. Do you feel like that's tough to be able to kind of learn how to be able to, be that field general?
Yeah, and I think that's the toughest thing for people. It's because you can't just focus solely on yourself. You got to worry about all 11 guys around you because, if someone's not right to your left or someone's not right to your right, all of a sudden, you're out of 2 gaps instead of just, having a guy next to you. And so you got to be able to communicate with everybody. And I think it is tough when guys move. And, the guys that do it, man, hats off to them because, I've been doing this now for 20 years or so, and it's still tough. So the guys that do it halfway through a career is pretty impressive.
Well, Alex, it's been a lot of fun to watch you play. Eagles fans really, really excited about you. Keep it going. We'll catch up with you later right here on PhiladelphiaEagles.com.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Alex Singleton and all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcast offerings at Eagles Entertainment. All that being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I'm Fran Duffy. We'll talk to you next week.
Raise a glass to that comforting feeling of an Eagles touchdown with the all-new Broad & Pattison wine collection created in partnership with Wink, featuring a Cabernet, a Rosé, and a Chardonnay. Broad & Pattison wines are the perfect pairing for any occasion. Now you can bring the sweet taste of victory with you to a dinner with friends or to the tailgate with your game day crew. Purchase online today at philadelphiaeagles.com/wine to stock up and have Broad & Pattison delivered right to your door. A portion of proceeds from every bottle benefit Eagles Autism Foundation.